digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Oscar Clark, who's from Unity amongst other things, but also Rocket Lolly. We have with us Dave Ranyard, formerly head of PlayStation London Studios, but now the CEO of I've forgotten the name, Dream Reality Interactive?
That is the name, Dream Reality
Interactive. I haven't said it enough times yet.
If we say it 4 times, I'll forgive you for forgetting it first.
It's Dream Reality Interactive. Dream Reality Interactive. Dream Reality Interactive. Last time, Dream Reality Interactive. There you go. I remembered. And Des from Altered Gene. Is there anything else you're working on that you want me to include as well, Des, or does Altered Gene cover it? Because Dave and Oscar like being, multi-purpose and multitasking. What about your good self?
No, I'm all right. My ego's not that big.
Right. Okay, so now that we've explained very thoroughly, in some cases, for our listeners exactly who you all are, would you like to explain a little bit about what each of you do, and just give us a little bit of a lowdown? I'm going to start with Dave, just because you've made me say it 4 times already. But tell me more about Dream Reality Interactive.
Okay, yeah. So we opened the doors in September. There's about 7 of us at the moment. We're going to grow to around 10 in early next year. We're making VR games. We've got a few different projects lined up. It's very, very exciting, which I can't really talk about. Interestingly, a couple of them are mobile VR. So I think that's for a new studio, it's a great place to start. Because you can make something in a relatively short time, and it's kind of pretty straightforward to get involved. But we're also interested in the high-end VR headsets as well.
Okay, so basically lots of VR gaming is the bottom line.
Yes.
Lovely.
Yes.
And also, just because we are talking about all your various multi-talents across this lovely group of people, I'll also mention that you're on the committee for the BAFTA VR group, are you not?
Yes, I am, and for the games group.
And you're on the BAFTA Games Committee as well. So I just thought I'd mention that too. Des, why don't you explain more to us about Altered Gene? Because you, although you're not saying much, you do have a multitude of game titles to your credit.
Yeah, so I bought Altered Gene about 3 years ago to kind of satisfy my creative endeavours that I wasn't getting at work. Yeah, it's been going all right. Done a couple of work fire projects. Year 1 was just basically trying to keep the company alive and not mess up. Year 2, we had some more app clients, and then last year we finally released Hyperstellar, which was our first mobile game. And now we're moving. Well, not moving. We just have a couple of VR games. One on Gear VR and one on Daydream. Which should arrive mid next year.
Wonderful stuff. Okay. And Oscar, why don't you tell us all about what you're doing with Rocket Lolly, and specifically what that is in relation to the Rocky Horror Show?
Yeah, so obviously I do a whole bunch of crazy things. And a year ago, we started development on the game Rocky Horror Touch Me, which is a rhythm action dance-based game on tablet. And the idea is that we want to try and make kind of stroking the screen a kind of dancing experience. We were a successful Kickstarter, and we went into alpha last month. So we've got the first kind of levels of the game out with real people trying it out and telling us what's wrong with it. But the key thing is it's an official Rocky Horror license. We're having lots of fun with Frankenfurter and Riff Raff and Magenta and Columbia and all that gang.
Awesome. And why don't you tell us what your role is in relation to Unity?
Yeah, so I'm an evangelist at Unity, and I evangelist for a thing called EveryPlay, which is a kind of gameplay recording tool that the Unity folks have. But I'm lucky that the guys let me talk about all sorts of things, because I've had so much experience making games, platforms, and services over the last 18 or so years. I've kind of been at every new kind of bleeding edge moment. So back in the early days, it was dial-up modems and online gaming communities, and the first esports back in '99, and then the first 3G mobile platforms, and then there was things like PlayStation Home, where I worked at London Studio with Dave. More recently, obviously with Unity and all the sort of social stuff that we do there. So we've had some crazy stuff, in my career, and I get to just describe what it's like trying to run games as a service and trying to survive the turmoils of working in an innovative environment.
Wonderful. Well, now that we've explained who everybody is, let's crack on with the discussion at hand. And the discussion is this week, it's unsurprisingly a little bit about VR. But what I wanted to specifically discuss was the application and use of artificial intelligence, or AI, within virtual reality. Because I know that this is something that you've been exploring quite a lot of, Dave. And, well, aside from the fact that you're a doctor, you are Dr. Dave, you are a doctor in AI, so it kind of makes sense that you would want to explore this. But I do tend to find that it is a little bit of an elephant in the room, in as much as there's a lot of people who are developing VR experiences or working with VR in their various verticals of industry, but very few who are talking about the application of AI within VR. So I'm curious, first of all, to understand what your stance is on it and what your perspective is on it, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, so I mean, a bit of background, I guess. So I did a PhD 20 years ago in AI. That was actually quite a statistics-based PhD, so it was all based in Bayesian probability. But this is a bit of a trite way of describing it. I think of a lot of AI, particularly machine learning, like neural networks and so on. It's really like lots of big matrices being multiplied together and then backpropagating information. And when you do that, you can learn and you can get new data and new information. And that's what's interesting. And that's what AI, at a base level, that's what AI does. But how it presents itself then in the modern world is things like, Siri and Google speech analysis and those kind of things. So what I found was I did my PhD. I finished it in 96. So that's 20 years ago. And I went into games shortly after that and came up against, rightly so, but lead programmers who said, we haven't really got any kind of processing left to do, real AI. You can use an if statement or a shift table or something, much simpler. So I kind of put it to one side for quite a long time. Recently, so for example, I went to the Web Summit in Lisbon a couple of, maybe 6 weeks ago, and in the speakers room there is crazy. It's like a club in itself. And then some of the speakers then put on special speeches for the speakers, one of which was a robot, this woman, female robot. I think she was called Sophie, but I can't remember exactly. And, the audience were asking her questions and she was replying pretty well. It was very interesting experience to be part of that. It really piqued my interest looking at it because actually you can sort of tell the cost of goods of making a physical robot will be really high to start with. They're not going to come out at like the price of an iPad. It's kind of like where VR was probably 15 years ago, where you could make something compelling, but it's like millions of dollars to make it. And it struck me that actually, in terms of conversation, and not just speech conversation, but the whole, if you have a conversation with somebody, you're also looking at their eyes, their body language, they're reacting to how you speak, what your body language is, how you gesticulate and so on. And actually those things, it will probably surface in VR before they surface in the physical world, because it's a lot easier to make in VR. I mean, still, I'm not saying it's easy, but in terms of the physical nature of of robotics, actually, if you combine the sort of language processing skills we see out there at the moment with game developers' skills of, creating emotion through engaging with characters. So, I mean, look at some of the characters that come out of Quantic Dream, for example, and the fact that you can, their eyes are going to cry, and the way they look at you, the way they respond to certain things. I think that coupling those things will really create something amazing in VR before we can physically make those robots, at least at a more realistic cost.
So it's interesting that you say this, because I distinctly remember being in a room, and you'll know who I'm talking about, but I'm not going to name names. I distinctly remember being in a room testing out an AI program for VR, essentially walking around a robot and interrogating a robot. And depending on the tone of voice that you used and the way that you walked around the robot and what you said to the robot, there was a multitude of different factors it was taken into consideration. But eventually, at some point, you get to the point where you literally give the robot an emotional breakdown from all the stress from you interrogating the robot. But it was very intense in terms of the eye contact, in terms of the body language and the way that it would, contract its body as you were being more aggressive, and just all these different small nuances that add up to human-like behaviour. Irrespective of the fact, obviously, it's not a human, it's clearly a robot I was speaking to that was in no way, masked to look like it was human. So you knew you was talking to a robot, but you still end up feeling quite sorry for the robot in the end. And I am curious as to the fact that we talk about the fact that it will be quite easy to create artificial intelligence within VR. But do we think that perhaps there is more application for this in augmented reality and layering this kind of information into the real world? So, for example, when I'm speaking to Oscar, having that headset, whether it's a HoloLens or whatever else it may be, and then being able to kind of see the warning signs, as Oscar's lying to me, or he's, thinking negative thoughts, or whatever the thing may be, where I'm getting little pointers from my
mind reading.
Well, I'm getting
play poker with him. And it will just tell you if he's lying. It'd be brilliant.
Oh, I mean, I don't know. This is interesting, isn't it? Because we've got kind of a couple of things that are going on here. We've got the Turing test kind of side of things. I.e., do we, can we get to the stage where we no longer notice that it's a computer that we're talking to? And then the other aspect of it, I think, is interesting is maybe not can they work out if we're lying or not, but this idea of machine learning being applied to other aspects of the experience. And if it's about looking at the sensory systems that, we can give our computer effectively, like putting on the glasses, putting on the, the AR thing, how do they interpret the information they're given? I think we're probably a little bit way off before computers can tell us if someone's lying, but the idea that we can train a program to learn a very specific set of conditions is really interesting. And the way that can be applied to creating richer and deeper game experiences is fascinating. Can we effectively deliver a sense of consequence in an AR game if we go around and pick flowers and create potions like we do in something like Skyrim? What does that do to the environment that we're playing? If we go around and kill all the monsters, all the creatures, or the beasts in that territory, what does that do to the way that the game reacts to us? And the idea of kind of which environments we're in, what we do in those environments, and how the game then learns to be more appropriate or to deliver consequences to our narrative arc. That I find fascinating.
So here's the thing is, I think that's kind of fascinating, but what I think is also really fascinating is as we're edging further and further into this territory of merging and fusing together multiple different technologies such as VR, such as AI, and then potentially augmented reality, and evolving things like robotics, as Dave was commenting on, I kind of see us getting a little bit closer and closer to things like, for example, humans, or for example, Westworld. And I am curious because one of the things that I noticed, especially in Westworld, and I want to focus on this for just 1 minute because
no spoilers, I haven't seen it yet.
Well, I'm not going to ruin it for anybody who hasn't watched it, but one of the things that many people are talking about is obviously this idea that the robots, they don't really know who they are or what they are, but they're eventually, they have a desire for freedom. They have a desire to get out of the theme park, so to speak. But one of the things that people haven't really commented on is the fact that actually, if you look at the theme park itself, and the way that the story has been kind of created and the world has been created for the TV show, is actually it's less of a theme park and more of a game. And I say this on the basis of you start out in your starter town, and it's all very genteel and nice, and it's just the Wild West and typical frontier town. But then as you get further and further away from the centre of the park, it becomes more and more complex and more difficult, and essentially the levels become harder in the same way that you would with a game. And I am curious in terms of this idea of, I'm not going to say gamification because I do hate the word gamification, but the idea of using and applying these very traditional game methodologies to much more encompassing environments. Like, let's say, for example, Disneyland, decided to build a whole new, section of their park where, in fact, it was a game process. And rather than just sitting on a roller coaster ride, you were actually progressing your way through something. Do we see this as something that potentially we're going to see more of this kind of thing? I'm curious, Des, whether you've got any thoughts on this.
Yeah, totally. So I haven't seen Westworld, and just to make one comment about, I understand the premise, and I think that certain things are deliberately not considered just to make it a good TV show. For example, if I was to design a similar theme park, the robots, the AI would 100% know what they were, because they need that context, right? So they need the rules between how much pressure to apply. They need to know that humans are more fragile than they are, and if anything goes wrong, they'd be able to sacrifice themselves with no sense of self-preservation.
We need Asimov rules.
Exactly right.
Okay, for the people that don't understand what that means, explain yourself, Oscar, because there's going to be people listening who don't know what an Asimov rule is.
The Asimov rules are the 3 laws of robotics. So the first rule of robotics, as I recall, is a robot must preserve human life. The second rule is that a robot must obey human orders. And the third rule is that a robot should protect their own survival. And the idea is that means that there's a hierarchy of behavior that protects and preserves human beings. There's actually, if you want to get really technical, a zeroth rule, but actually, no, let's not go into that, because that's a spoiler in itself if you know the story.
That's a whole other podcast. But Des, do continue. Sorry, we rudely interrupted you.
That's fine. So what you're talking about is adaptive experiences, and I think across the board, across games, not just in VR, like what we're trying to do is reach as many people as possible. We actually work on some machine learning modules. It's very crude, but what we want to do is we want to keep the casual players in. And then we want to provide a little bit more challenge to the more advanced players. And then obviously for the experts, we want to keep them in all within the same game. So we're always assessing what people are doing and trying to change the gameplay for that. So for what you describe in Westworld, I mean, that sounds like the ideal situation is, you start in the hub town, all sort of like, fairly standard. But then as you progress through the game and want the more deeper experience TV show, quite rightly, it gets harder. And I think, loads of people are doing some really good stuff with that. And Oscar can speak more about this, I guess, but, engagement's key. And I think machine learning and variable difficulty is where we should all be going.
Okay. So Dave, as the doctor amongst us, what's your thoughts in terms of where we see programs like Humans or Westworld, they've kind of taken a certain degree of, creative license and a bit of a leap of faith in terms of which way the technology will go. But they have come to some very interesting conclusions that lead us to these questions around humanity. And granted, some of this is down to, making good TV and drama and having good stories and narrative. But ultimately, the nature of how they envision the future of this technology has led to some very interesting humanitarian questions, like the rights of a robot. I know in Humans, one of the things is that one of the robots is trying to be identified as human, so that she can have human rights and be tried as a human rather than as a robot. And I'm curious, Dave, to hear your thoughts on this in terms of realistically, in the real world, do we think that that's going to become an issue as we move forward, but we have to start questioning the nature of what constitutes humanity and consciousness?
Well, sort of gone from AI to philosophy, really, isn't it? I think, in all seriousness, certainly, I don't think in my lifetime that's going to be an issue. It's funny, isn't it? Because if you look at how a child treats a toy, for example, if they're sort of mean to the toy, even though we know the toys aren't like the toys in Toy Story that come alive, we might still actually be a little bit frustrated, because you sort of think, well, if a child can do that with a toy, maybe they can do it with another child or with a cat or a dog or something like that. So I think it's probably more like about how we behave ourselves in terms of, and how we express ourselves. I don't really think we're going to get to, certainly not in the near future, humanoids walking about that we can't tell the difference from humans, and therefore there's like this deeper philosophy if they should have the same rights and stuff. Maybe it will happen in some hundreds of years, but I think in practical terms, the AI that works now and in the fairly near future, it's actually AI that's been around for a long time, but we've not had the compute power or the portability, for example. But generally, it works very well in very defined fields. So even though you might use a neural net, which is a basic general tool, you train it in a specific field. And that means you're not really getting a whole person. You're getting something that can deal with tax returns, or you're getting something that can process language. By that, I mean the meaning of language within a specific field. So you could have something that knows that can diagnose what's wrong with a certain type of car, for example, based on inputs. In real terms, it's still very simple intelligence. It's not, putting together. I mean, I haven't seen what DeepMind are doing. That looks, really interesting. They're trying to solve some of the world's problems using AI, and I think that's fascinating. But from what I would expect and what I believe, they'll still be working within specific fields. So if they're training neural nets on all the information around cancer, it will be just about cancer or just about specific type of cancer, not just like solving the politics of the world or anything else. So from that perspective, I'm relatively scientific about it. However, in terms of projecting ourselves and our own beliefs as to how we treat others, I think there's probably more of there is a moral question there about how you want to be perceived in terms of, and also the impact, economically and socially on bringing AI in. Will it remove people's opportunity to work, for example? So there might be more social and political impact from that next 20, 30 years.
Gosh, we're moving into a whole other era of podcast here, aren't we?
Well, I was going to say I'm a huge fan of the DeepMind team. I was lucky enough to do some work on a game project they had going before they got bought by Google. And Demis and all those guys are just absolutely amazing people. They're really smart. They really care about what they're doing. And like you say, they're trying to solve some incredibly interesting problems. But like Dave said, we've got to be kind of realistic about what's actually possible right now. And let's face it, we don't even know what consciousness is, let alone the idea that we'll be able to create an artificial consciousness. We're probably a century away from that, I'm guessing.
I tend to think that we're closer to creating the illusion of intelligence rather than intelligence itself. Yeah. And in fact, a great example of this, Dave, is the volumetric hologram of the Holocaust survivor, where you can sit and you can kind of ask him questions, and he's not him, but the technology is kind of using voice recognition to understand what the questions are that you're asking, and then flicking through thousands of different questions that the survivor in question was asked, and then just kind of spitting out the right response. So it gives the impression that you're speaking to somebody who's paying attention and listening to you, and you're having a meaningful conversation. But the reality is it's very much the illusion of intelligence.
Yes. But it's really interesting. I mean, things like Alexa and the Google Now speakers that you can talk to in your own home. They've got like the power of internet search behind them as well. So you can ask quite specific questions, like how tall is the Eiffel Tower, and it will be able to tell you. So in some ways, there's a sense of intelligence, but really it's just mapping like internet search and that kind of knowledge base that's out there in different input and output. But what in principle, computers have been able to interact with us through text and images for 20 or 30 years now, and it's just a new way of interacting with computers. But that doesn't mean that it's conscious and it's choice and those things. It's still machines and algorithms at the end of the day.
Indeed. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate you all spending the time to have a chat with us about this, what ended up being a very philosophical discussion. But what I want to do is, as per usual, we give our listeners a chance and a way to be able to find out a little bit more about what you're up to by asking you to share with us your social media handle of choice. And I'm going to start with you, Des.
Cool. I've got a couple of handles, but on Twitter, I'm most active on there, and I am at @kid_Desimo. For any work about Altered Gene, it's Altered_Gene. And on Facebook, we're a bit more active on there. So facebook.com/AlteredGeneGames.
Awesome. And Oscar?
I can be found on Twitter mostly, and I have this crazy title I've had ever since I was at Wireplay, and it's Athanasius, so that's at Athanateus.
Wonderful. And Dave, what about your good self?
I am Dr__Dave on Twitter.
Wonderful. Thank you. And before we depart, I'm going to hark back to something that we did previously, which was the mega panel at Insomnia 59. And because I don't feel complete now, having done it for 24 hours straight, without saying, Oscar, why don't you tell us the URL for donating to the mega panel?
How many times did we do that? So, yeah, we did do 24 hours. I think in total I was up for 42 over the period. I actually stayed up after the mega panel and attended.
You went to a pub quiz, I heard.
I went to the Insomnia pub quiz afterwards. I can't believe I was able to do that and still be human the next day. Yeah, so we did. We had amazing guests like Dave, talking about I think things that matter with games, so games and culture, but in particular, the idea that we were trying to raise money, and there is a URL, and it's still open if you want to give some money to such a great charity, which is helping disabled people be able to play games on an even footing with everybody else. And the URL is bit.ly/MP special effect. So check that out. Give us some money, and you'll be able to help lots of people have all the kind of power of like autonomy and competence and self-esteem and escape that comes from gameplay.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. DigitalJamSessions.com